Shad Khan, the owner of the Jaguars, he spoke with Mark Long of the AP, the Associated Press, about the team. And you tell me whether or not this feels like all of the attention and all of the focus goes to Doug Pederson and whether or not Doug Pederson's on the hot seat. So there was a couple of things that he discussed on the play calling, because apparently Doug Pederson handed over play calling duties last year. Shad Khan said, quote, "Yeah, I have an opinion, but I don't want to tell people what we need to do because then things don't work out. They look at me and say, we did it because you wanted it." He also pointed out in a recent column in the New York Times, and there was a line that indicated, could Doug Pederson's future be hanging in the balance in 2024? And he said, quote, "If I were in that situation, I'd want my hands on the wheel. Doug, he's empowered. I'm going to let him decide." He also talked about these struggles last year, and he said the following: "Injuries are a part of the game. We had some of those injuries, but I think it's an organizational failure that it happened. All of those players I talked to, it's like, how could this happen? What happened? For me, it really is a cause for self-reflection, and then something good could come out of it because we just can't have that again this year." End quotes. That to me feels like Doug Pederson's been put on notice. I expect more out of you. You've never finished below 500 in the 2 years that you've been a head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but apparently going into this year, based on what happened last year, either they get it done or the Jags are in the market for a new head coach next year.
Hey.
Am I crazy to read that much into it?
I think the decision to extend Trevor Lawrence leads you down the path of kind of getting a sense for, all right, this is where the organization feels like they got it right, and that's the drafting of Trevor Lawrence, because they're now on to their second head coach in Doug Pederson. And they brought him in to work with a young quarterback, to help develop this young quarterback. I think that was the thought process behind the jump for Carson Wentz in his rookie year when they were naming it Wentzylvania and all that, and Doug Pederson was part of that staff. That's at least how it looks on the onset, is they are looking at this year as a crucial year for Doug Pederson and his staff, because it's not so much the players and how they've built this roster, which maybe you could make that case. I mean, to me, the biggest issue I see with this team, at least last year, was their offensive line. The protection was spotty. And they've addressed it, so they should be improved. But it's also been the play calling. And there's been an internal debate between, is it Press Taylor calling plays, is it Doug Pederson, who ultimately is going to be calling the plays or should be calling the plays. Everything feels horizontal. It feels like they're trying to stretch the field horizontally. There's no threat to a defense vertically. And again, that could be based on, hey, we don't feel like we've got that guy to stretch the field vertically, and this is what we're going to try to do to help create space for playmakers to make plays, right? Spread things out. Try to stretch the field sideline to sideline. But as LaVar would tell you, that really doesn't scare a defense. You got to be able to have speed and guys who can create big plays where it puts pressure on the rush, puts pressure on the coverage, puts pressure on everyone. And they didn't demonstrate that last year. So they need to incorporate more of it. But I think who's calling those plays, who's making those decisions on offense, will largely determine what happens for the Jags this season.
I think it's so critical for Trevor Lawrence after getting that, extension, as you mentioned. It's critical for him to become the quarterback that everybody has expected him to become. I think he's done well, and at times has been really, really encouraging to see what he's able to do. But I think if we're all being honest, if we're looking at Trevor Lawrence and what his projection was coming out of college, I think he's come up short on what he has been expected to be. And I think that's solely after doing the extension, I would say it solely falls at the feet of the coaching staff, because you clearly don't think that it's Trevor Lawrence. And I would be in agreement with that. I don't think that Trevor Lawrence not being a top 5 quarterback in the National Football League by now is because Trevor Lawrence is incapable of doing it at the NFL level. And so if you got to figure out what's the reason, you got to start with the head coach. And then now the head coach is on notice, so the head coach had better identify why Trevor Lawrence has not become more of what he's needed to become since coming into the National Football League. And I think that that's ultimately what this is all about, is that you have a small market team. You got a generational talent in Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence hasn't been exactly everything that he's been advertised to be coming into the league. I think that's a tough one. That's a tough one to have to, if I'm Shad Khan and I know I can pack my stadium out. I'm starting to sound nasally. My sinuses are crazy right now.
Hey, blow a snot rocket on the air right now.
No, it won't happen.
Blow one of those.
That's kind of funny. Look, I had the little sniff though.
Yeah. That's what Jonas does after he says something kind of witty. He does a little
snot rocket. It's kind of
after a
interesting.
read.
Listen, I've got a
Oh
tell.
yeah, that is true. He does do that.
Yeah,
he does do that.
Listen,
yeah.
I've got tells. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So what?
Anyway, I think that's kind of, you know, you want to be able to sell your stadium. You want to be able to leverage if you want to, get a new stadium built, or you want to go overseas, whatever it may be that they're looking to leverage. Trevor Lawrence is a major part of this, and I think the entire storyline of this whole entire conversation is probably based around Trevor Lawrence. What is Trevor Lawrence going to be this year and moving forward? And Doug Pederson had better figure out how to get the best out of him and get him to transition from where he's at, like he's on the cusp, to being on the other side of being on the cusp to being like that guy. That's what I would say.
Is there something to maybe Doug Pederson? I don't know if rubbing people the wrong way is the term to go with, or maybe wearing out his welcome, because he did great things in Philly, and it wasn't long after they won a Super Bowl and they did historic things together that they had to move on from him. And then he gets to Jacksonville, and if you look down the list of coaches that have been there, man, Gus Bradley got a long leash. So did Doug Marrone. None of them had success early on like Doug Pederson did. Again, as mentioned, never finished below 500 since he's been there. Yet the owner picks this offseason to come out and say, to go as far as he's on the hot seat, we need more. And it's like, well, what happened in the previous regimes that are different than this one? Especially coming off what happened with Urban Meyer and that whole situation. I wonder maybe if Doug Pederson, if this is another example of, maybe he doesn't work well with some owners, and maybe he doesn't, there's a little bit of friction there. Maybe that's why there could be the potential of him being out this year, because they haven't shown this sort of impatience before with other head coaches outside of what happened with Urban Meyer, which was sort of a one-off situation.
How many of them had Trevor Lawrence?
None of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. And I
that's
think
what I would say.
Yeah, I think to LaVar's point, I think the objective was very clear when Doug Pederson got there. And you make it to the divisional round in the first year, you feel like you're taking steps back. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who didn't think this team took a step back last year.
Oh, yeah.
And meanwhile, in your division, like Houston's getting better. Indianapolis is going to be competitive. Not sure where Tennessee's going to finish up, but everyone around you feel like is getting better. And so you got to make a move. And I think they have enough this offseason to not necessarily say they're going all in for this year. I mean, I feel like most teams feel like when they have a quarterback, they're always going all in, right? That window's never closing. But there was a very clear objective. Maximize Trevor Lawrence, go try to win a Super Bowl. And if you can't, and I feel like there's a lot of owners who are probably sitting here right now who feel this sort of pressure, there's a guy named Bill Belichick who's, kind of sitting out there for you. There's that big fish that, why not give him a call? I mean, worst he can say to you is no. And he'd want to get back into it, and he'd want to be a place where, hey, he's back on the East Coast. He's got a quarterback that you can believe into. He's got pieces on defense. Josh Allen's phenomenal off the edge. Like with Bill Belichick out there, until he says he's done, he's not going to coach. I feel like for most owners who are looking critically at their head coach, they've got this window, and they're saying, well, I can bring him in. I've got a 2, 3, 4-year window, whatever it is, whatever Bill Belichick wants to do. But as long as he's out there and he hasn't said, I'm done coaching, and that's a possibility, it puts more pressure on any coach that's on the hot seat or any coach that has underachieved or took a step back last year. And Doug Pederson sits in that category.
By the way, that's a great call. Nobody's mentioned Jacksonville as a potential landing spot for Belichick. With a quarterback already in place, that could make a ton of sense. Because all we've heard about is, the Cowboys, the Eagles, places like that. But, maybe Jacksonville is the spot there. A nice place to go ahead and get that wins record in that division. That could be fun. So look at you pointing out. So can we run with that, Lee, on Twitter, please, on Fox Sports Radio from that account?
Bill Belichick to Jacksonville next year.
Brady Quinn says the Jaguars should fire Doug Pederson and hire Bill Belichick. We could just go with that.
Am I wrong in the assessment that if you were any owner out there with Bill Belichick, I feel like that's going to be a conversation. By the way, so let's just not stop at Belichick. Like, Mike Vrabel's out right now. Mike Vrabel would be an awesome fit down in Jacksonville. Yeah, he's another one that you've got some guys right now that I think there's some owners that are probably having conversations saying, like, we've got this guy teed up. And for the most part, you think about, you go offense, then you go defense. The next time is how you view sometimes bringing in head coaches. Easier to sell that way, different change and all that. But, I mean, there's multiple guys out there that I think are putting pressure on current head coaches because they've had good stints in the past. Whatever has or hasn't worked out. But, I mean, the GOAT and Bill Belichick is number one there. But even, again, Vrabel, look at his resume. He's another one that comes to mind that could easily step in there, I think, provide a spark to that franchise and that team.
It's like finding out the rocket ship down the street just got single. All of a sudden, everybody perks up. Anybody who's got a relationship on thin ice, then you start looking around.
As if you could get the rocket ship down the street.